Hello, geometry students. Today we're going to be going over the Unit 4 concept bite. I believe it's on page 6 and 7 and 8. So page 6 through 8. So if you're not there already, go ahead and turn to that, and we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to be using a webcam, so you're going to see my hands, and I'll show you basically what to do to simplify this project and make it as simple as possible. You're going to have to pause the video and kind of draw and cut some things to catch up. So if you can, have some graph paper on hand, some gridded paper, right, and some scissors. Okay. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here. And basically, I want to show you how this is going to go. Okay. So hopefully you can see that there. I've got the scrap paper, and then what I want you to do is draw these things. So I know there's a lot of instructions on page 6. I want you to, for the most part, I'm just going to go over what those instructions are kind of leading you to. And so you don't have to worry about reading those necessarily, but if you want to read them, you can. But if you just follow along, we'll get through the whole thing just fine. So the first thing I want to point out is that I want you to, on your graph paper, draw out these figures. So with a straight edge, and it's very important that you use a straight edge in this case, because the more perfect your lines are, the easier this project is going to be for you. Okay, so with your straight edge, you're going to make these 3 squares. So you're going to make a 6 by 6 square. So that means it's 6 length and it's 6 tall. So it's a 6 by 6 square. Okay, then an 8 by 8 square and a 10 by 10 square. So you're going to make these 3 squares, 6 by 6, an 8 by 8, and a 10 by 10. And then I need 4 of these rectangles. So these are each 6 by 8 rectangles. And so I need 4 of those identical congruent rectangles. All right. So go ahead and pause the video right now. And with your straight edge and graph paper, go ahead and make these shapes right here. Okay. You don't have to put the labels in there. You don't have to do that. Okay. In fact, it's probably better that you don't do that. So don't put the labels in there. We're actually going to label it with some other things here in a minute. So I want you to go ahead and draw those out. Okay. Now, once you've drawn them out, it should look like this. After that, I want you to cut them out. So you'll have these shapes cut out. So these are just the same shapes that are drawn over there. I just cut them out. Okay. So I've got my 3 squares. I've got my 6 by 6 square. Got my 8 by 8 square. I've got a 10 by 10 square. And then I've got 4 congruent rectangles. These are each 6 by 8 rectangles. Okay. So once you've got that, so go ahead and pause the video and cut out your shapes so that you should be caught up with me here. Okay. Now, once you've done that, each of these rectangles, we're actually going to cut them in half. Okay. We're actually going to cut them in half diagonally. So we're going to cut them in half going diagonally. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. And you can do the same. So cut them corner to corner, just like that. So you should have 2, when you cut it, you should have 2 congruent triangles, like that. 2 congruent right triangles, just like that. So we're going to do that with all 4 of these rectangles. So all 4 of these rectangles are going to be cut corner to corner, diagonally. So in total, you'll have 8 congruent right triangles once you've cut all 4 of these rectangles. Okay. Do not cut your squares. Do not cut these. Just cut these 4 congruent rectangles, cut them in half diagonally. And so now we'll have 8 congruent right triangles. Okay. 8 congruent right triangles here. All right, so now we're going to do some labeling here. Everything that has a length of 6, you're going to label with an A. So everything that has a length of 6, you're going to label with an A. Oh, my camera there. So this 6 by 6 square, it's going to have A's all around. So we're going to use lowercase a here. Lowercase a, A. So on each of the sides, since they're all 6, we're going to label each side with a lowercase a there. Hopefully you can see that there. Okay. Now, on the triangles, they also have a length of 6 on one of their sides. So one of their sides, the length that's 6, will get also a lowercase a on it. Okay. So each of these little triangles will get an A side as well. Okay. So go ahead and label each of these little triangles. We'll get an A, a lowercase a, on the side that has 6. Okay. Don't label the side that is length 8. We'll do that later. So the that's length 6. Okay. So those all my triangles now have an A, and then my 6 by 6 square has A's all around. Now with the 8 by 8 square, we're going to label with the lowercase b. So it'll get a B on all 4 of its sides. Oh, I see that there. Okay, cool. And similarly with the triangles, each of them will get a B as well along the side that's 8. So it'll have an A on the side that's 6 and a B that side that's 8. So make sure we're going to label, go around, label each of these congruent triangles with a B along the side that has length 8. Lastly, with the 10 by 10 square, you're going to label each side with a, well, you guessed it, a C. Okay, so a lowercase c along each of those sides there. It's like that. And do we label the triangles with a C? Well, do they have a length of 10? Well, actually they do. It's along their diagonal. And I can tell because look, if I line this up here, notice it's the exact same length. So yes, this diagonal that we cut, this cut line, that has length 10 as well. So we can go ahead and put a C on each of these right triangles along the diagonal cut. So each of these right triangles, when you're done, they'll have an A, a B, and a C labeled in them. The A will be along the 6, the B will be along the side that's 8, and the C will be along the side that's 10. Okay, you can see those. Hopefully you can see that there. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of puzzling. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the A square and the B square, and we're going to take 4 of these right triangles, and we'll put them on the side here together. Okay, and then we're going to do the same over here with the C square and these 4 triangles over here. So I've got my big square, my 10 by 10 square, and then 4 of these congruent triangles. And then I've got my 2 smaller squares and 4 of these congruent triangles. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use these pieces over here to create a bigger square. So we're going to use these pieces, these 2 squares and these 4 triangles to make a bigger square. Similarly, over here, we're going to use this big square and these 4 right triangles to make a bigger square. So it's kind of like a puzzle. I don't know if you've played with puzzles that have geometric shapes like this, where you're kind of moving them around and like putting them next to each other to try to make some sort of shape or something. But that's what we're doing here. So we're going to try to make a bigger square using these shapes and then make a bigger square using these shapes. All right, I hope that sort of makes sense. Each of these are going to be like a puzzle. All right, I'm going to help you with this one over here. So one of the key things when I'm thinking about this puzzle, oh, and one more thing, there should be no like empty spaces, no gaps. So like I can't have like a gap like that or like this. and there should be no overlap. So I shouldn't have pieces like going over each other like that, okay? But when I'm forming this, notice kind of what you want to do is form it such that the B's line up with each other. So notice I could put this triangle above this like that, okay? And I can put this next one, this. Okay. Notice this length right here is A. So maybe I could put my A square right next to that. Okay. Think of it as like pieces of a puzzle. A's connect to A's, B's with B's, C's with C's. Okay. Could put this one right here. And I can put that one there. Okay. You see how I formed a larger square by using those pieces? Okay. This is considered the harder one. But I'm going to let you try these pieces and try to form another square, just like we did over here. Try to form another square using these pieces. So this puzzle's a little bit different, but I think you could do it. I'll give you a hint to get you started. This, since it's a C square, you can move it a little bit like this, and the C's will connect like that. Okay. See if you could finish the rest of that square from there. Okay. I hope that sort of makes sense. But this image is going to come into play in just a minute, because I want you to notice something about this square here. And by the way, the square that you make over here should be the exact same size as the square you make over here. So the square you make over here will be congruent to the square we just made over here. These two squares should be congruent when you formed this one over here. Okay. Now, notice the length along the top here. Okay. Notice this length, right? This part of this triangle is a B, and then this is an A. So this length across here, this length across the top is A plus B. You see that? A plus B. That's this length here. And what's the length here? What's the height of this square? Well, notice this length is A, and this is B. So this is also A plus B. So the length along the top is the same as along the side, which should make sense because it's a square, right? It should be the same length on each side. A plus B here, A plus B here. You should see A plus B, that's same here, and along the bottom. Okay. Now this is going to come to play in just a minute. So what we're going to do is, let's take a look at the assignment. So once you've arranged all the pieces from each group of the square, I want you to paste them here. So on page 6, you're going to tape them or glue them onto this page here, page 6. Actually do it on page 7. So this has this empty space. Put the two squares that you formed and put them here. Okay. If you don't have glue or tape, what you can do is just draw them out as best you can, including where all the cuts are. Now let's go on to answering these questions. So imagine we've made both squares. I'm assuming at this point you've created the other square. You've paused it and completed that puzzle. But let's say, it says, how did the areas of the two squares you formed in step 5 compare? So they're talking about the two squares that we formed, after we formed the two puzzles. Now, ideally, if you did it correctly, then these two squares should be congruent. So that's why I want you to write here, that the two squares that we formed the two squares that I formed are congruent. Again, to remind you, congruent means they're the exact same size, exact same shape. They're exactly the same. In geometry, that means congruent. Write an algebraic expression for the area of each of these squares. So the area of a square, so like let's say you have like, you don't have to draw this to the side, but let's say you have a square Pretend that's a square. And let's say it's maybe 7 by 7. Well, what would be the area of this square? Well, to find the area of a square, you take that side length and you square it. In other words, that'd be the area of this would be 7 squared, which is 49. Now, our square that we formed has each length a plus b, remember? So what would be the area of this? Well, the area would be a plus b squared. A plus b squared. Now that should be the area of both of the squares that you formed. If you want, you can square this out by doing a plus b times a plus b, and that would be a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. This is the area, usually shown with a capital A. This is the area of this square here. So that's the inside area, inside of this. Now let's consider the area of the 3 squares that we cut out. It says that you cut from colored paper, but we just use regular graph paper. What are the 3 squares we cut out? They're talking about the 3 original squares we cut, the 6 by 6, the 8 by 8, and the 10 by 10 square. Okay, now since those 2 squares that we formed have the same area, and they both have those 4 congruent triangles, then we could say that the area of the 2 smaller squares, the areas of the 2 smaller squares add up to the area of the larger square. Largest square. So what does that mean? That means the area of the a square, so that's shown by this, a squared, plus the area of the other, the medium square. Those 2 areas add up to the area of the larger square. That's the c square. Okay. So how do we show that? Well, one thing we can do is you can use a ruler to measure the length of A, measure the length of B, and measure the length of C, and put those measurements into here. Okay, so how would that work? So with a ruler, you can measure the length of A, measure the length of B, and measure the length of C. But we don't really necessarily have to do that because we use graph paper. So we could just measure it in terms of how many little squares it takes. So for the A square, that was a 6 by 6 square, right? So the length of A is 6, isn't it? 6 units. Plus, what was the length of B? 8 units, right? And what was the length of C? That was 10 units. So the lowercase a, lowercase b, and lowercase c, these are lengths of 6, 8, and 10. So we want to make sure that this is true. So what's 6 squared? Well, that means 6 times 6. That's 36. What's the length? What's 8 squared? Well, that's 64. Does that equal 10 squared? Does that equal 100? Well, yes, it does. 36 plus 64, it does. So 100 equals 100. So we would say, yes, these measures. So in a complete sentence, I want you to finish this up. Yes, these measures confirm the equation we got in 2a. So finish that with a sentence. Yes, these measurements confirm the equation that we got in part 2a. Next one. Explain how the diagram represents your equation in part 2. Okay, so for that, they're talking about, if you go to page 490 in your textbook, I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to open up the textbook to page 490, and you should do so as well if you have the textbook on you. If not, I'll just show you here from the document cam. Okay, so let me show you the document cam. It's referring to this picture down here. Okay, so move that a little bit closer. I don't know if you can see that. That don't really help. Okay, but basically here's A, here's B, here's C. So what I want you to say also is that in that diagram, the area of the two smaller squares add up to the area of the largest square. Okay, so basically just what we wrote here. Okay, so in that diagram, the area of the two smaller squares add up to the largest square. Okay, so go ahead and write that there for number 3. Now we noticed that that worked for right triangles, but does that work for all triangles? The answer is no. It only works for right triangles. So for number 4, I want you to explain that this theorem, known as the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, you should have worked on this already earlier in the unit, but this theorem, the Pythagorean theorem, only works for right triangles. So it does not work for non-right triangles. So only works for right triangles. And I want you to explain that there. And hopefully you've already seen that it only works for right triangles earlier in the unit. Okay, so that's that activity. I hope that made sense. I hope you were able to follow along. And with that, I will see you guys next time. Take care.